Brad, heads up. Brad Weaver looked up just in time to see the pop fly dropping lazily toward him. He lifted his left hand and snared it easily in his glove. 3 outs. Game over. He wasn't too impressed with the kids from the north side of town. He and his friends from Maple Street took this one 8-2, even with his incessant daydreaming. Even with their team sprinkled with 7th graders. His team was, with one exception, loaded with kids from the 6th grade, the one exception being Craig Miller, a 7th grader with a constant grin who was also held back a year. Despite his sunny disposition, Craig was considered to be the slightest bit dim. Not stupid, mind you, just a bit slower than the others. Though you were gonna eat that one, Weaver. This was from Daniel Porter, probably Brad's best friend and their class clown. In your dreams, Porter. Those guys can't touch us. Even with you on our side. Brad shot back. Craig snorted. Daniel looked abashed, then seemed to determine a course of action, one that any kid would understand after receiving a zinger he had no answer to. He tackled Brad and began to rub his head with his knuckles. Brad delivered a poke to the ribs that always caused Daniel to jump back like he had just been zapped with electricity. Youch! Daniel cried, scrambling back. Ass wipe. Brad grinned at his friend's discomfort and swung an imaginary bat. 2 victories in one day for the Bradster. Brad. Daniel's retort was cut short by a high-pitched yell and the sight of the petite girl bounding across the field toward them. Brad cringed. It was Angela Peters, the girl who had moved in next door to him this summer. Not that Angela, who was just in the 4th grade this year, was an unpleasant person, but definitely an embarrassing presence right now. This summer, all of Brad's friends had gone to camp. Brad had stayed home to work on his batting practice with a high school boy named Jimmy, whose mother was a friend of his mother. Jimmy was becoming a young star for the high school team, and his time would soon be very limited. So Brad jumped at the chance to work out with Jimmy over the summer. Unfortunately, it did not take all of his time, and he spent many summer days wandering around bored. Until Angela moved in, that is. She had showed up on his steps the first day with a bowl of brownies, so of course he could not be mean to her. They chatted over brownies and milk, and despite himself, Brad began to like the girl. She was actually very interesting for a girl, even if her incredibly dark eyes sometimes disturbed him for some reason that he could not understand. So the two ended up spending time together during the summer playing video games and generally wandering around. Angela had even gotten Brad to have a picnic/tea party once. Despite this, Brad had basically not seen Angela since his friends had come home from camp. He never mentioned Angela to them either. He supposed that he would be embarrassed to admit that he had hung around with a girl all summer. Besides, once school had started, he had been too busy, especially with these weekend sandlot games. Brad, where have you been? I haven't seen you in 2 weeks. Angela was panting from her short trot across the field. Daniel gave his friend a sidelong glance and grinned. Brad was hopelessly struck. Angela. Oh, I have been pretty busy with school and all. How are you doing? Angela pouted slightly. Well, you seem to have made time for your little games. You should come over tomorrow. We can watch some movies or play video games. Daniel snickered. Yeah, Brad, you guys can play Barbie. This earned him a withering glance from Angela and a sharp reply. For your information, we play PlayStation. Brad began to blush. I don't think I can, Angela. I have plans already. Angela looked disappointed. Well, okay. How about Sunday then? Yeah, I have stuff to do on Sunday too. Angela looked hurt. Brad, is something the matter? You're acting weird. It's okay, Brad, go play Barbie. We can let you go for one game. Daniel chimed in, snickering. Angela shot him an evil look. You're awful stuck on Barbie. Do you have a collection? Daniel, for the second time that day, was stuck without a reply. This time, however, there was no tackle as Brad pulled Angela aside. Angela, look, I had fun this summer, but I've been friends with them for 3 or 4 years. I can't just turn my back on them. Why can't you be friends with me too? We can be, but I can't hang out anymore. They wouldn't understand. You mean I embarrass you? No, it's just that guys and girls don't hang out together, and I've been friends with them longer. So since they're your friends, you can't hang out with girls? Fine, Brad. I wish I had known this before. Angela trotted towards the edge of the field. tears welling up in her eyes. Brad watched her go, suddenly feeling like a complete jerk. He turned back to his friends. Daniel grinned at his friend. "Aren't you two going to play dress up?" "Shut up, Daniel." Angela walked home sobbing. As she turned up her walk, a spark appeared in her eye and appeared to smolder. "We'll see about that, Brad." "We'll see." Brad woke up the next day to the sun in his face. He had left the shades open again. He rolled out of bed and onto his feet, rubbing the sleep from his eyes. Well, at least he wouldn't be late for today's practice at the sandlot. He began to get dressed when he had a strange feeling. He couldn't put his finger on it, but he suddenly had a feeling of dread. Shrugging it off, he got dressed and went downstairs where he poured himself a bowl of Rice Krispies and a glass of orange juice. After breakfast, he walked outside and started to run down to the lot. Then he noticed Angela was watching him from her front door. He felt guilty all over again and considered walking over to apologize when she simply smiled, waved, and walked back inside giggling. Brad was unnerved. He couldn't put his finger on why, but it was like she knew something he didn't. He shrugged it off and ran to the sandlot. About halfway there, he realized that he had forgotten his bat and glove, but it didn't matter. For some reason, he didn't really want to practice anymore. When he arrived, Daniel and Craig were already there. Daniel looked at him strangely. "Hey man, what's with your face?" Brad shot him a look. "What about my face?" Craig considered Brad for a moment and chimed in, "You're as white as a sheet. Something freak you out?" Brad pictured Angela waving at him. Why did that unnerve him like this? "No," he said. "I just don't think it would be a good idea to practice today." Daniel shrugged. "Sounds good to me. Actually, we were going to tell you that we wanted to take a day off from practice. Both of us took our gear home a few minutes ago." Brad breathed in relief. "So, what do you guys want to do today then?" Craig replied, "I dunno. Want to go to the mall?" "Sure," Daniel said. "I was going to suggest that too." Brad frowned at them. "What are we going to do at the mall?" Daniel furrowed his brow slightly. "I dunno. We can go play some video games or something. Dude, you have a PlayStation 2 at your house. So I want to see if there's any new games in the arcade, okay?" Daniel snapped. "Okay, man." Brad held up his hands. "We can go to the mall." The trio arrived at the mall with Daniel and Craig chattering away up front and Brad lagging a bit behind, still feeling uneasy and a little strange. He soon fell into the conversation and was starting to feel a little more at ease. And almost fell on his, but when he bumped into Craig. Craig had stopped and was looking into a store to the right. "Watch it, jack off," he snarled. Then he saw what Craig was looking at. In the Victoria's Secret store, Sarah Little, a high school freshman, was looking intently at a rack of thongs. To say the least, Sarah was beautiful. She easily looked 2 years older than she was. Even to Brad, who was not really looking at girls like that yet, she was gorgeous. And to Brad, Craig's enraptured stare signaled a moment he had been dreading. Craig was 2 years older than he and Daniel. It seemed like when guys got to be about 13, they were more and more susceptible to girls, especially ones like Sarah. It had finally happened to Craig, it seemed. And right on time, Brad nudged his in the side. "Snap out of it, Romeo. Video games, remember?" Craig blushed guiltily and stomped ahead to the arcade. They spent 2 hours and more allowance than they should have in the arcade. They decided to get a bite to eat at the food court and wander around a bit. As they walked by a toy store, Brad looked in and suddenly felt the need to go in. "Hey guys, let's go in KB for a second." Daniel looked over. "Okay, I've been meaning to go in there anyway." As they entered the store, they all split up. Brad wandered until he came across the display rack of action figures from the recent Star Wars movie. He had been collecting them and began looking for a Yoda, which was hard to find these days. His eyes landed on the rack containing the 12-inch tall figures and specifically on a Senator Amidala doll. Funny, he thought, I didn't realize how much she looks like Angela, just older. He was pondering this thought when his blood froze. One of its eyes sparkled at him, just like a real eye, one cutting below the tissue and seeking the soul itself. Brad backpedaled into a rack of keychains, knocking some to the floor. Customers and staff looked around and Swathe frightened boy scooped them up and tossed them in a tray on the rack, then scurried toward the door. Daniel came trotting up behind him, bag in hand. Hey man, wait up. You could have let me finish checking out. What's gotten into you anyway? I thought you were gonna knock that stand down. Brad looked around. Nothing, I just slipped. Where's Craig? Looking around, they finally spotted Craig in front of the express talking to Sarah. They were getting on very well, and Brad felt a pang of jealousy. He supposed that it was because he knew what would happen next. Craig would start dating and forget his friends. The way he and Sarah were chatting, you would think they had known each other for years. Brad and Daniel walked over and stood next to Craig. Sarah looked at Brad strangely and excused herself. They watched her saunter off. Brad looked at Craig. What was that all about? You two were chatting like you grew up together. Craig frowned at Brad. We've known each other for a while. I can't believe I haven't mentioned her to you before. Brad again felt a little sad, knowing his friend seemed to be moving on. Then he got the third shock of the day. Craig was wearing earrings. What are those? He practically shouted. He could see what they were. Small silver hoops in each ear. What these? Sarah talked me into them. I couldn't resist her. Brad was extremely confused now. Daniel cocked an eyebrow. Are you okay, Brad? You really look pale. Maybe it's time to leave them all. Brad suppressed a shudder. For some reason, he felt his world was not making sense at the moment. Yeah, he said. I think I want to get home. The three friends walked toward home, and surprisingly, conversation was sparse. They neared Craig's house and said their goodbyes, planning to meet up the next day at the lot. Craig turned and walked up his walkway. Brad did a double take. He could swear that Craig was wearing hip-hugger jeans with flared legs. He turned to Daniel to ask for confirmation, but Daniel was already walking towards his house 3 doors down. Brad suppressed a shiver and ran toward his house across the street. When he looked over at Angela's house, he quickened his pace. She was sitting on her front steps. He was at the door when she looked up, her eyes locking onto his. Brad yelped and ran inside his house, slamming the door behind him and sinking to the floor. If only she had opened her mouth to speak to him. Instead, it was those dark, depthless eyes. Did you have fun with your friends, Brad? Brad rolled over in bed, the sun again providing an unwelcome morning greeting. He stretched lazily for a moment, then put his feet on the floor and lifted himself out of bed. Shuffling to the bathroom, he gazed drearily into the mirror, looking at his familiar face and confirming what he suspected. His eyes were red. He had expected that, considering the amount of sleep he had gotten the night before. His sleep was fitful, made so by a dream that disturbed him greatly, yet remained slightly out of reach during the waking hours. After a quick shower and a bowl of cereal, Brad strolled out the front door and down the street, his pace noticeably quickening as he passed Angela's house. He quickly arrived at his destination 2 blocks away. It would be a welcome change to work through some batting practice with his unofficial baseball mentor. Jimmy would have balked at being considered a mentor at his 15 years of age, but there was no question that Brad's skill had improved after practicing this summer with him. Brad rapped at the door. Jimmy opened the door and grinned at his student. Couldn't wait to get started today, huh? Brad grinned. I'm ready to knock a few out of the park, Jimmy. Jimmy scratched his chin, the gesture seeming a bit forced for a 15-year-old. I think you need a park first, pal. Anyway, we have to cut this one off about noon. I have a date at 1 o'clock. Brad made a face. A date? Instead of baseball? What's this world coming to? Well, not just any date. I promised Sarah Little I would take her to the park downtown today. Even you have to admit she's a real hottie, dude. I guess I can get over it today. Brad stated with mock reluctance. Let's play some ball. After a spirited practice, Brad thanked Jimmy and returned home to get some lunch. With practice behind him and a full stomach to boot, Brad felt much better. Perhaps he had just let his imagination run wild the last few days. Full of new energy, he bounded across the street to Daniel's house and knocked. Daniel came to the door moments later and invited Brad in. Daniel looked as tired as Brad had felt this morning. Brad scrutinized him carefully. Are you okay, Daniel? Yeah, I just couldn't sleep too good last night. Weird dreams. Brad's head snapped around. Weird dreams? What about? I don't know, I couldn't remember them after I woke up. Brad felt the now familiar chill beginning again, then shook it off. Hey, maybe we should all hit a movie. Get dressed and we'll go get Craig. Daniel agreed, and soon they were knocking on Craig's door. His mother opened the door and directed them upstairs to his room. They could already hear the sounds of the PlayStation as they entered the room, where they could see the television screen displaying a road race game and the back of the big office chair given to Craig when his father bought a new one. Presumably slouched down in the chair was Craig, immersed totally in the race. Brad cleared his throat. Craig, get off that game, man. We're going to a movie. Okay, dude, I can go for one. Craig's hand reached out and turned the console off, then spun around to get his shoes. Brad blinked several times and tried to reconcile with what he was seeing. Craig hadn't been slouching at all. He was just shorter, slimmer, and his usually ear-length, messy brown hair was almost to his shoulders. Brad sipped quick breaths of air and glanced at Daniel for some kind of validation. Daniel was standing there patiently, looking for all the world like there was nothing at all amiss. Craig stood up and walked past them to his bathroom. Where he had been 2 inches taller than Brad's 5 feet 4 inches height, he was now at least 2 inches shorter than Brad. Craig didn't seem to notice, as he was busy brushing his hair until any bit of unruliness was tamed. Okay, let's go. Brad was feeling his world about to turn black when Daniel's voice interrupted his descent. Brad, are you okay? Brad collected himself and nodded. He was able to manage a terse, I'm ready to go. The experience at the movie theater was not much better. For some reason, Craig was interested in seeing Sweet Home Alabama, which detailed a fashion designer's return home only to find herself in a love triangle with her husband there and the man she wanted to marry. Brad was fit to be tied at this point and absolutely refused to watch it. They finally decided on The Ring, which Brad regretted after the movie began to revolve around a little girl's demonic spirit haunting the world of the living. More frightening than anything was Craig's little scream when the girl's spirit finally made its appearance. As the lights came up, Brad made for the exit quickly. Outside, he was able to catch his breath before Daniel and Craig caught up with him. Craig touched Brad's arm with his fingertips. Hey, are you okay? I didn't think it was that scary. Brad recoiled slightly and nodded his head. Yeah, I just need to get home. Mom wouldn't want me to be late for dinner. Craig smiled sweetly. Yeah, I have homework to finish tonight. I guess I need to get home too. The trio began the walk home with Craig slightly in front and Brad lagging slightly, with Daniel glancing over at him, a slight frown crossing his face. Brad was sure that Daniel also didn't notice that Craig's shirt had become tight and light blue with thin satin trim at the neck and sleeves, or the fact that Craig was now wearing flared mud jeans with leather lacing running up the sides. As Craig reached his walkway, he turned and gave a little wave to the two. Smiling, he said, "Bye, boys. See you later." Then he strolled through the front door. Brad couldn't help but notice the slight wiggle. Brad looked at the closed door, then at Daniel, who was still unaware of anything wrong. Well, he thought, I can at least warn Daniel, and maybe together we can do something to stop this. Hey Daniel, let's go to your house. There's something I need to tell you. Okay, come on over. They walked in and secluded themselves in Daniel's room in the back of the house. Brad took a breath. I don't know where to start, dude. Daniel grinned at him. Hey, just take your time. We're best friends. Nothing comes between us. Brad felt a little relief in spite of himself. At least Daniel would always be there for him. Have you noticed anything strange about Craig? Now that you mention it, something seems a little wrong, but I can't put my finger on it. Oh, I think there's a lot strange going on. Daniel frowned. I see. Well, hold that thought, I need to go take a whiz. Daniel left the room and Brad sat on the bed, feeling better than he had since lunch. Maybe everything would work out after all. He noticed Daniel's bag from the toy store on the bed and idly opened it while he pondered what to do next. His fingers went numb and he dropped the bag on the bed, spilling its contents. A Barbie doll. Blonde with a sparkly white dress. Brad almost ran out of the room, nearly knocking Daniel down as he returned from the bathroom. He mumbled that he had to get home and that he would see Daniel tomorrow. He refused to look at anything but his front door until he was inside the sanctuary of his living room, but the voice followed him still. Giggling. Did you and your friends have fun, Brad? Brad took his seat on the team bus for their trip to Chesterfield to play their school's top rival. He sat heavily in the seat and pulled his cap down over his eyes to nap on the way there. He soon felt the lurching motion of the bus starting forward and allowed it to lull him into a lazy half-doze. Knowing that he would wake up when the bus stopped, he resolved to nap all the way. He was just dropping out of consciousness when a giggle brought him back to a waking state. With a strange sense of doom settling at the bottom of his stomach, he slowly lifted his cap from his eyes and looked into a pair of sparkling green eyes that did not belong on his bus. Those eyes were set below a mane of long red hair that framed a pretty face sprinkled with freckles. The girl was looking directly at him and giggling, as were a number of other girls who were dressed in ball uniforms and peeking over and around seats at him. The doom in his stomach turned into white-hot panic as he began to sit up and opened his mouth to question the interlopers. "Why are you girls on our bus?" Red eyebrows furrowed downward as the girl considered this. "You're on our bus. I think you're in the wrong place, unless you want to play softball with us. But I'm not sure you're eligible for the team." With that, the redhead began giggling again, joined by more hearty laughter from the other girls. Brad was close to panicking. He was missing the biggest game of the year because he was on the wrong bus. Worse yet, he would have to ride with the girls' softball team to their game and then ride back home before he could let anyone know where he was. Brad's mind raced to process those fears and seek a solution when he felt a hand touch his shoulder. He looked up and saw a pretty girl with long brown hair and light green eyes wearing a cheerleader outfit attached to the hand on his shoulder. She smiled as she spoke. "It's okay, Brad. You can sit with us at the game." Brad bolted upright in his bed and nervously scanned his room. No cheerleaders or red-headed girls in sight. He realized that he had been dreaming and breathed deeply, trying to still his heart from jackhammering his ribcage. He looked at the clock. 5:15 a.m. He had barely gotten 4 hours of sleep after tossing most of the night and finally settling into a fitful sleep just after 1 o'clock. He knew that he couldn't take much more of this. His mother had been concerned when he returned from Daniel's house and went straight to his room and stayed there the rest of the night, even foregoing dinner. He resolved to confront Angela the next day, but even that did not make his stomach stop doing gymnastics. In fact, it made it worse. Brad resigned himself to wakefulness and walked downstairs to spend the next couple of hours before school watching television and formulating his plan for the day. She stepped out of the bus onto the sidewalk at the front of the school, looking for all the world like someone's precious little angel. Brad snorted. He doubted Angela was anywhere near an angel, but was more likely just the opposite. He trotted up to her before she could get to the front doors. "Angela." She turned and saw Brad, a sly smile crossing her delicate face. "Why, Brad? What are you doing here? Don't you have a game to play or more important people to hang out with?" Brad frowned. She was playing with him. "That's enough, Angela. What did you do to my friends?" That infuriating smile again. "Why, Brad? What are you talking about? I haven't seen your friends. You know what I mean. How they are changing and acting different. Maybe they are just growing up. Stop it. You know what's happening. I want you to change them back and leave them alone." Angela pushed past Brad, headed toward the door as the bell rang. "I don't know what you want me to do, Brad. Sometimes friends just find other interests and leave you behind." With that, and one last victorious smirk, Angela disappeared into the hallway and left Brad smoldering and shaken. The day at school went well, considering the circumstances Brad found himself in. He didn't see Craig and Daniel too much during the day, but wasn't surprised to see Craig wearing khaki slacks that looked a bit tight and hip-hugging paired with a striped, stretchy polo shirt with cap sleeves. He noted that Craig seemed a lot more popular with the older girls. As for Daniel, he mainly looked wide-eyed and confused all day, as if he was out of place all day. And neither met him at the end of the day at their usual spot to walk home. Brad felt suddenly very alone. He began to wonder how he was going to cope with his situation when he had an idea who he could talk to about what was happening. He began the short walk to Jimmy's house and hoped his mentor would have some ideas. Brad approached Jimmy's house after an uneventful 10-minute walk and stepped up onto the porch. He knocked on the door and waited patiently. Soon, he heard the door unlatch and Jimmy's mother opened it. She seemed surprised to see him. "Brad, It's a little early in the week for lessons, isn't it? Brad smiled. Yes, ma'am, I guess it is. Well, you're going to be disappointed. Your mentor had to go over to the porter's house right after practice today. Brad frowned in confusion. Okay, I'll just run over there then. Thanks, ma'am. Okay, Brad. Good luck with your studies. Brad started toward Daniel's house, wondering what Jimmy was doing there and why he had told his mother that Brad was struggling with math class. On the way to Daniel's house, Brad spotted Sarah Little walking toward his neighborhood and wondered if she was coming to see Jimmy too. He really hoped she wasn't. The incident at the mall the other day had really unnerved him, and she reminded him of what had happened to Craig. As he approached Daniel's front door, he was relieved to see her cross the street and keep walking. He knocked on the door and felt somewhat like a salesman with all the door knocking today. The door opened, and Jimmy stood there with a vacant look on his face. Brad. Hi, sorry, I can't work with you today, I'm kind of busy here. Brad started to ease his way in. That's okay, Jimmy. I actually just wanted to chat with you. Brad trailed off when he saw a small figure standing in the room behind Jimmy. His gaze whipped back to Jimmy. What is she doing here? Angela smiled at Brad as she waved from the living room. I'm here babysitting, Jimmy supplied helpfully. And Angela came over. Angela motioned to Brad. Come on back, Brad, Daniel and I are playing in here. Brad looked back at Jimmy, who shrugged and sat on the couch, pausing to pick up a magazine. Brad followed Angela down the hall, where she led him into Daniel's room. Brad was surprised to find that by now, the sight in front of him didn't shock him. Daniel's room was now decorated in white and had a dresser with a large mirror on it, covered with hats and hair accessories as well as assorted knickknacks. There was also a large dollhouse on the floor with several dolls lounging around in each room. Seated on his bed, which was now covered with a colorful comforter, was Daniel. He looked more confused now than he did earlier. Daniel didn't seem to have changed any, to Brad's relief, but he did seem younger. He held a doll that he had bought at the mall. Angela smiled back at Brad. Danny wanted me to come over to play with his dolls, she explained. He doesn't know too many people to play with now that he's been moved to a different grade. Brad's stare shot daggers at Angela. What are you talking about, Angela? Angela pouted innocently. Well, it seems poor Danny was too young for the grade he was in. He's been moved to a different grade where he belongs. Daniel spoke at this point while nodding in assent. I couldn't understand what was going on today. I was really sad. Brad now was shocked to hear Daniel sounding really young, but could now see that Daniel also looked smaller, as if he were younger. He whirled on Angela. Stop it, Angela. Give me my friends back. Brad, maybe you should have been a better friend to them, and you'd still have them. I didn't see you coming to play with Danny. That's because he plays baseball, not dolls. Boys play baseball. Angela motioned back to Daniel. Oh, Brad, are you sure about that? Brad nearly stumbled when he turned to look at Daniel. Daniel's hair was now longer and lighter, and he looked much younger. He was now dressed in an outfit that seemed more appropriate for a younger girl. Daniel didn't seem to notice the change and continued playing. Brad gasped for air. Change him back. Hear me? Change Daniel back now. Angela was considering the girl on the bed. I don't think we can call her Daniel anymore. She's too cute for that. I think I'll call her something else. She's going to be very pretty when she grows up. She looked at Brad, noting the horror on his face. You can't see the resemblance, Brad? Let me help. As Brad watched in disbelief, the outfit on Brittany seemed to transform. Her clothes changed to a more childlike, yet cute style. Angela stepped behind her and began arranging her hair into pigtails. I think you'll find that you and your friend have very little in common now, Brad. The closest she'll ever get to a sports field is when she's cheering from the sidelines. Brad's protests were interrupted by Jimmy in the doorway. What's going on in here? Jimmy demanded. Angela smiled sweetly. Just helping her with her hair. You could probably help us with that, Jimmy. Brad turned to look at Jimmy, but noticed that his hair had changed, now longer and different in color. Jimmy seemed oblivious to the change and complimented Angela on how pretty her hair looked. Brad's confusion grew as Angela smirked at him, clearly enjoying his reaction. Brad felt overwhelmed and couldn't find the words. I think I need to go home. Angela's eyes narrowed with amusement. Of course, Brad. Maybe you need time to think. Brad fled the house and walked home, feeling drained by everything he'd witnessed. At home, his parents tried to comfort him, but nothing could ease the heaviness in his heart. He lay in bed, trying to push the images from his mind, but couldn't. The next morning, he knew he had to confront Angela and find a way to end this.